Dear students, welcome to UGC EPG Pathashala on Human Rights and Duties. In the unit relating to the national mechanisms for the protection and enforcement of human rights, we take up the module relating to role of the executive. At the end of this module, you will understand the ways in which the executive has used its position to carry forward the agenda of human rights. And the module seeks to explain how the executive can support the embedding of human rights in the entire governance process. And you will also learn how executive fulfills its role as trustee of people's aspirations, and that they must ensure that law and policy support human rights. This module will also examine the role of executive in the task of protection and promotion of human rights. Now let us consider what is the special role played by the cabinet as a part of the executive. Cabinets comprise the most influential ministers, often headed by the Prime Minister, who collectively take the lead on the issues. Regardless of the form the executive takes, be it presidential form of government or a parliamentary system, it has a special, crucial human rights role to play by guiding their bureaucracies in the contributions they make in the process of making international human rights principles and laws, and it also sets national priorities and policy directions in most Commonwealth countries. The cabinet dictates the legislative program. The cabinet members can also be active in making specific laws and national action plans that further human rights efforts. In the last module, we saw how legislations have been, enacted for protecting the rights of different groups. When we look at Indian context and when we consider the role of the executive, we see that it has a critical role in the implementation of legislations or their enforcement. Having a legislation is only at one level, and eventually what matters is enforcement at the ground level. And executive is also responsible for formulation of plans, policies, programs, among other things, for governance, development, and protection and promotion of human rights. The executive also takes up implementation of these policies and programs, and it has a monitoring role, and also it undertakes evaluation of how these programs are functioning in practice. How is the structure of the executive at the center and states? If you look at part 5 in the chapter 1 of the Constitution of India, it deals with the executive of the Union, and according to Constitution, executive has been taking up a series of actions, including preparation and implementation of 5-year plans. Of course, these have recently been wound up following the establishment of Niti Aayog, and prior to that there were 12 5-year plans, and the executive also has a role in implementation of specific policies and programs and schemes, many of which directly relate to human rights. And the executive is also tasked with the enforcement of legislations adopted by the legislature. In fact, in the last module, we saw the examples of a number of legislations which protect the rights of some vulnerable sections. And when we look at the structure of the executive, we find that there are separate departments have been created, both at the center as well as in the states, for women and child development, social justice, health, food, education, labor, and other critical areas, all of which have a strong linkage to the protection of the rights of citizens. In fact, each of these departments take up a number of tasks. The executive also has a significant role in the treaty monitoring process. Today, there are about 70-odd international human rights treaties which are there, and many of them have been signed and ratified by India. Signing is at one level, and then later on, monitoring the implementation and reporting thereon is at another level. And there are core human rights treaties, and there are optional protocols, and there are core ILO, that is International Labour Organization conventions, which have been ratified by India. These include the Covenant on or the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, and there's International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and then there is a International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. And if you look at this, among the core treaties which have been signed and ratified by India, they include Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination against Women in 1979, Convention on the Rights of the Child, and then you have a Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and there is an optional protocol to the Convention on the Rights of the Child on the involvement of children in armed conflict, which was adopted by the United Nations in the year 2000, and then there is a separate optional protocol to the Convention on the Rights of the Child, which deals with commercial sexual exploitation of children, sale of children, child prostitution, and this also has been adopted by the India. And each of these conventions which have been signed and ratified give rise to 3 levels of obligation. There is an obligation to protection, promotion, and there is an obligation to respect. When you say a state has a obligation to respect, it shall do nothing which breaches the spirit of the covenant or convention which it has ratified. And the protection and promotions also entails a number of tasks. The 10 core international treaties create legal obligations for states, parties to promote and protect human rights at the national level. In fact, the moment a country signs and ratifies, it is supposed to submit an initial state party report to the treaty monitoring body on the measures it has taken to give effect to the rights which are mentioned in that particular instrument. And these measures include entire range of legislative, executive, judicial, educational and other measures to give effect to the rights which are mentioned in the International Human Rights Convention. And when we look at how do states observe a human rights treaty, there are a number of ways in which states perform this process or this function. There is a periodicity which is mentioned in the specific treaty on the number of years or the frequency or the intervals in which the state party is required to submit a comprehensive report on all the obligations which are outlined in that particular instrument, and these reports are then formally considered by the treaty monitoring bodies, and then a detailed recommendations or observations are made by the treaty monitoring body, which are supposed to be implemented by the state party under review. The state party in its report is also required to mention the various achievements and also mention the difficulties faced by them in securing the rights. And executive has a great role in the entire treaty monitoring or reporting process. For example, right from the stage of report preparation, there is a national report or a country report, and it offers to each state party to conduct a comprehensive review to harmonize national law and policy with relevant international human rights convention. It also enables the state, particularly represented through its executive, to monitor the progress made in promoting the enjoyment of rights, identify the shortcomings and problems in its approach to protection or implementation of rights given in that particular convention, assess future needs and goals for more effective implementation. The states are also required to plan and develop appropriate policies. There are a number of ways in which the executive can participate in the treaty monitoring process, right from the stage of a report preparation, and the executive is required to conduct a comprehensive review to harmonize national law and policy with relevant international human rights treaties. In addition, the executive is required to monitor the progress made in promoting the enjoyment of rights. It is required to identify the shortcomings and challenges, problems in its implementation or in its approach to implementation of international human rights standards. The executive is also required to assess future needs and goals for more effective implementation of human rights. The executive's ambit also includes planning and developing appropriate policies to achieve these goals. And if you look at the reporting cycle under human rights treaties, it starts from the preparation of a country report or a national report. Just as we do with the treaty monitoring process, in the universal periodic review also, the executive has a great role. It has been outlined in the UN Human Rights Council Resolution 5/1. A unique three-dimensional approach was adopted by the Human Rights Council, in which 3 documents were supposed to be submitted to the Human Rights Council. A, there's a report prepared by the state containing a self-assessment of its own human rights situation. B, there is a compilation which is done by the United Nations, by the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights in relation to all the human rights treaty bodies and special procedures mandate holders. And third, there is an additional reliable and credible information provided by various stakeholders, which includes National Human Rights Commission, non-governmental organizations, and other bodies. And when we look at in the universal periodic review process, and under this UPR mechanism, the human rights situation of all UN member states is reviewed once in every 4 to 4.5 years. There is a cycle which is followed. During the first cycle, all UN member states have been reviewed, with 48 states being reviewed every year. and the second cycle started in the year 2012 and with 42 states reviewed each year. And this review is a peer review done by 47 countries which are represented in the Human Rights Council. There is all these peer countries can take part in the Human Rights Council review. Each review is assisted by a group of 3 states known as Troika, who serve as a rapporteurs. Reviews take place through an interactive discussion during a meeting of the Y.S.R working group between the state under review on the one hand and on the other United Nations member states. Non-governmental organizations can participate in this Y.S.R process and can also submit information which under the category of other stakeholders and which can be added to the Y.S.R review process. Once this review is done by the working group, a report is prepared by the Troika with the involvement of the state under review and assistance from the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. It takes the form of a detailed report along with the recommendations for compliance. The report is referred to as the outcome report. It provides a summary of the actual discussion. The outcome report is adopted by a resolution or decision, preferably by consensus, to underline the cooperative nature of this peer review process. Once the outcome report is adopted by the Human Rights Council, it concludes the Geneva stage, and then the follow-up action begins at the national level. And again, the executive has a critical role in following up the outcome report and in seeing that the recommendations made in the outcome report are followed at the ground level where it matters the most. The state under review has to implement the recommendations and improve the human rights situation in the country before the next cycle starts. And if you look at the Human Rights Council resolution 5/1, which is again a very important resolution in the history of Human Rights Council, it elaborates on the modalities and process of the review. States are encouraged to prepare the information they submit through a broad and wide consultation process at the national level and with all relevant stakeholders and with all relevant actors. So the executive has to lead this wide consultation process. In addition, additional credible and reliable information provided by other relevant stakeholders to the Y.S.R process will be summarized by the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. The other relevant stakeholders like National Human Rights Commission or non-governmental organizations may attend the review in the working group. And before the adoption of the outcome by the Human Rights Council plenary, the state under review should be offered the opportunity to present its replies to questions or issues. Other relevant stakeholders will have the opportunity to make general observations, comments before the adoption of the outcome report. Recently, a few months back, India was reviewed and the then Attorney General of India, Mr. Mukul Rohatgi, represented the Indian delegation at the Human Rights Council. The outcome of the Universal Periodic Review as a result of this cooperative mechanism should be implemented primarily by the state concerned and in particular by the executive. And also other relevant stakeholders have a role in monitoring this entire effort. And in this UPR process, the executive has an important role to play, starting with the preparation of a country report till the implementation of the outcome report or outcome or implementation of all the recommendations. In the entire UPR process, the executive has an important role to play, starting with the preparation of a country report till the implementation of the recommendations in the outcome report. To sum up, the executive has a critical role to play in the task of protection and promotion of human rights. It formulates plans, policies, programs, schemes to give effect to the human rights. And there are a number of departments, both at the center as well as in the state, which have a direct relevance to the protection and promotion of human rights, starting from women and child development, social justice, food department, and labor department, etc. In addition to these, the executive also has a role in submitting reports from time to various treaties to which it is a party, and it also implements the recommendations made by these treaty monitoring bodies, and the executive has an important role to play in the universal periodic review process, right from the stage of preparation of a country paper till the stage of implementation of the recommendations. So just as judiciary and legislature have an important role, so does the executive in the task of protection and promotion of human rights in any country. Thank you.